Imagine walking through your favorite park on a crisp evening and noticing a small, shivering puppy tucked away in a quiet corner, night after night. What secret sorrow could drive such a little soul to seek refuge under the stars? Stay with us as we uncover a story that will touch your heart with its raw emotion and unexpected moments of vulnerability. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a quiet ritual unfolded at Maplewood Dog Park. While families strolled and children played, one tiny puppy, with soft, matted fur and big, soulful eyes, would settle into a secluded spot beneath an old oak tree. Despite the cool air and the playful distractions around him, he returned night after night, as if waiting for something, or someone, to bring him solace. Officer Daniel Rivera, a dedicated and empathetic member of the local police force, had been patrolling the area on his nightly rounds when he first noticed the little dog. Over several evenings, he observed the pup's silent vigil, his small body curled up against the chill of the night. Something about the pup's unwavering presence and quiet sorrow stirred a deep compassion within Rivera. One particular evening, as Rivera approached the puppy to offer a warm blanket and some food, the tiny creature looked up with eyes brimming with grief. Overcome by the raw emotion of the moment, the officer unexpectedly broke down in tears. That heart-wrenching reaction marked the beginning of his quest to uncover the truth behind the puppy's nightly refuge, a mystery that would soon reveal hidden layers of loss and the unexpected power of caring. Every evening at Maplewood Dog Park, as twilight softened the edges of the day, a quiet mystery began unfolding. The park, once known simply as a cheerful haven for families and dogs, had become, in recent weeks, the stage for a poignant routine. While joggers and picnickers passed by without much thought, one small stray puppy made his nightly appearance. With scruffy, matted fur and eyes that held an indescribable sadness, the puppy would settle under an old oak tree, far from the noise of the playground. Night after night he returned, unfazed by the cool breeze and the distant laughter of children. Officer Daniel Rivera, a dedicated member of the local police force known for his empathy, had begun to notice the puppy during his routine patrols. Initially, Rivera thought nothing of it. Perhaps the pup was simply a stray seeking shelter. But as the evenings turned into a steady pattern, he found himself drawn to the scene. Each time he passed by, the puppy's quiet vigil stirred something deep within him. It was as if those soulful eyes were silently pleading for help or companionship. On one such night, as the park's lamplights cast gentle halos over dew-kissed grass, Officer Rivera decided to act. He parked his cruiser near the tree and stepped out, his breath visible in the cool air. Approaching slowly so as not to startle the small creature, he knelt beside the puppy and offered a warm blanket and a small packet of food. The puppy, initially cautious, eventually allowed Rivera to draw near. In that tender moment, when the officer met the puppy's gaze, something in Rivera broke. Overwhelmed by the raw emotion and the evident pain in those eyes, he unexpectedly broke down in tears. His colleagues later recalled that his usually steady composure was shattered by the intensity of compassion he felt at that moment. The following day, news of Rivera's tearful encounter began to spread among the community. Locals who frequented Maplewood Dog Park were moved by the story. Whispers of the crying cop filled casual conversations at neighborhood cafes and community centers. For many, it symbolized that even those hardened by the demands of duty could not ignore the silent cries for help. At the police station, Rivera's fellow officers expressed mixed feelings. Some admired his vulnerability, believing it was a sign that he truly cared about his community, while others worried that such emotions might compromise his ability to enforce the law. But Rivera himself was resolute. He became determined to learn more about the puppy, where he came from, why he chose the park as his nightly refuge, and what, if anything, could be done to ease his apparent suffering. In his quest for answers, Officer Rivera began speaking with the park's regulars. He approached an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins, who had been feeding the ducks near the park's pond for years. "I've seen that little pup every night," Mrs. Jenkins confided softly. "I always thought he was waiting for someone who would never come." Her wistful tone hinted at her own experiences of loss, and Rivera realized that the puppy's loneliness might be a mirror for the forgotten and the neglected in the community. Rivera also visited the local animal shelter, where he met Carla Martinez, a kind-hearted shelter volunteer with a deep love for stray animals. Carla explained that the shelter had received a few reports of a small puppy wandering near the park, but he had never been brought in. "He seems too scared or too proud to approach us," she observed, gently stroking a rescued dog. "Maybe he has a story, one that he can't tell us in words." Her words resonated with Rivera, deepening his resolve to help the pup on his own terms. Meanwhile, the puppy continued his nightly routine undisturbed. Each night, he returned to that familiar spot under the oak tree, as if bound by an invisible tether to his past. Rivera, now more involved than ever, began to document his observations. He kept a small notebook in his patrol car, jotting down details of the puppy's behavior, the weather conditions, and any conversations he had with park visitors. Over time, patterns emerged. The puppy seemed to shiver more on particularly cold nights, and his eyes would sometimes appear more sorrowful after heavy rain. Rivera wondered if the weather might be a subtle indicator of his emotional state, a reflection of the puppy's inner turmoil. As Rivera delved deeper into the mystery, he felt an increasing personal responsibility for the little creature. His nightly encounters with the puppy were no longer just routine patrol observations. They were moments that awakened his own humanity. He began to imagine that perhaps this tiny animal was not merely a stray, but a symbol of hope for those who felt abandoned. In the midst of these reflections, Officer Rivera made a decision. He would dedicate his off-duty hours to trying to locate the puppy's origins. Was the pup abandoned, or had he been lost from a home that once loved him? The questions swirled in Rivera's mind as he set off with determination the next evening, armed with food, a warm blanket, and a heart full of compassion. Thus, as Maplewood Dog Park grew quiet under the stars, a new chapter was unfolding. A chapter in which one cop's determination to understand and alleviate a stray's silent sorrow promised to spark changes in ways neither of them could yet imagine. In the days following Officer Rivera's tearful encounter with the stray puppy, the quiet mystery at Maplewood Dog Park deepened. What had begun as a series of silent observations now gave way to a maze of new questions, and with them, unexpected conflicts and interactions that would test Rivera's resolve. Determined to learn more about the puppy's origins, Officer Rivera began to dedicate his off-duty hours to following every lead. He made several return visits to the park, hoping to catch subtle clues that might hint at the pup's past. One chilly evening, while leaving a small bag of food and a warm blanket near his usual spot under the oak tree, Rivera noticed something unusual, a torn piece of fabric clinging to a bush nearby. The fabric, a fragment of a soft sweater in a faded shade of blue, stirred a suspicion in him. Had the puppy once belonged to someone, a loving family who now desperately searched for him? The discovery sparked a series of interactions with local residents. Officer Rivera began by talking with longtime park regulars. Mrs. Jenkins, the kindly elderly woman who fed the ducks at the pond, recalled a memory from many years ago. "I remember a little girl who used to come here with her pup," she said slowly, her eyes misting. "They'd sit by that oak tree laughing together. I never saw them leave. And then one day the pup was gone." Though vague, her recollection hinted at a past connection that might explain the puppy's nightly vigil. At the same time, Rivera visited the local animal shelter again, where volunteer Carla Martinez greeted him warmly. "I've been wondering about that little fellow," Carla admitted as she carefully examined a flyer for lost pets. "There have been rumors among our volunteers. Some say the puppy has been spotted near a neighborhood where families used to live. But every time we try to follow up, the trail goes cold." Her words deepened Rivera's determination. He felt that every detail was a piece of a larger puzzle that needed to be solved. Conflict also began to emerge within Rivera's own department. Some fellow officers admired his compassionate approach and saw his vulnerability as a strength, while others were concerned that his emotional involvement might compromise his professional judgment. During a routine roll call one brisk morning, a senior officer, Sergeant Lopez, pulled Rivera aside. "I respect what you're doing, Daniel," he said in a low, measured tone, "but don't let your heart get in the way of your duty. "We're here to enforce the law, not get tangled in personal sentiment." Rivera's response was quiet, yet firm. "Sometimes, Sergeant, caring is exactly what the law needs," he replied, his eyes reflecting both determination and a hint of sorrow. The brief exchange left an undercurrent of tension that would simmer beneath future interactions. Meanwhile, as Rivera pursued the trail, local social media began to buzz with posts about the crying cop and his unusual attachment to a stray puppy. Some community members expressed their support and admiration, sharing heartfelt messages and photos of similar stories from their own lives. Others questioned if a police officer should be so emotionally involved with what they called a stray. The online debate added pressure, forcing Rivera to navigate public opinion while still trying to uncover the truth behind the pup's history. One particularly restless evening, as Rivera sat in his patrol car reviewing his notebook, filled with observations and sketches of the stray's behavior, he received a call from a young woman named Lisa. She claimed to have seen the little puppy in a neighborhood on the outskirts of town, a place where many abandoned pets were often left behind after families moved away. Lisa's voice was tentative, yet earnest. "Officer Rivera, I think I know something about that puppy," she said. "My neighbor mentioned that a family once lived in the area and their dog disappeared mysteriously after a tragic accident." This new lead added both hope and complication. Rivera arranged to meet Lisa the next day, hoping that her account might provide a clearer picture of the pup's past. The following afternoon, in a modest suburban park far from Maplewood, Lisa and Rivera walked along a quiet path. Over cups of lukewarm coffee from a nearby cafe, Lisa recounted her neighbor's story in detail. How a beloved family pet had vanished after its owner suffered a personal tragedy, leaving behind only fragments of memories and a faded sweater matching the fabric Rivera had found. The revelation was both heartwarming and heartrending, suggesting that the stray puppy might indeed be the long-lost companion of a family torn apart by sorrow. Rivera felt a renewed sense of purpose as he carefully recorded every detail, aware that this information could change everything. Back at Maplewood Dog Park that evening, as the puppy once again settled beneath the oak tree, Rivera approached with his usual gentle care. This time, however, he carried not only a blanket and food, but also the promise of answers. Watching the pup's quiet vigil, he realized that each night was a silent testament, a call for recognition of a past that had been forgotten. The park, with its echoes of laughter and memories of bygone days, now held within it the secret of a lost family and a story of love, loss, and redemption waiting to be told. In this intricate web of clues, conflicts, and tender interactions, Officer Rivera's journey to uncover the puppy's origins had taken on a profound meaning. Every conversation, every piece of evidence, and every heartfelt exchange brought him one step closer to unveiling the truth. And in doing so, he not only sought to restore a forgotten past, but also to reaffirm that compassion, no matter how quietly it is expressed, has the power to heal even the deepest of wounds. Just when Officer Daniel Rivera began piecing together the clues about the stray puppy's mysterious nightly vigil, a discovery during one of his routine follow-ups turned everything on its head. One chilly evening, while carefully retracing his steps around Maplewood Dog Park, Rivera noticed something glinting near the base of the old oak tree where the puppy always slept. Approaching with cautious curiosity, he found a small worn leather collar lying partially buried under fallen leaves. Clutched in the collar was a tiny, engraved tag, a tag that bore a name and a phone number, but, more importantly, a date. The date, Rivera soon realized, corresponded with a long-forgotten tragedy in the community's past. Intrigued and sensing that this might be the key to unlocking the puppy's origin, Rivera took the collar back to his station for a closer look. Under the fluorescent lights, he examined the tag carefully. The inscription read, "For Emma, always remember." The name struck a chord deep within him, though he couldn't quite place its significance at first. Determined to find answers, Rivera began searching through old community records and local newspaper archives. What he uncovered was both heartbreaking and startling. More than 20 years ago, a beloved little girl named Emma had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The case had gripped the community, and for years her disappearance had haunted local memories. Although the investigation had eventually gone cold, whispers and family accounts had kept Emma's story alive. Rivera discovered that Emma had been known for her unwavering bond with her small, scruffy puppy, a companion that had been by her side through joy and sorrow. According to archived reports, the puppy was last seen with Emma on the day she disappeared, leaving behind a mystery that no one had ever been able to solve. As Rivera processed the revelation, a flood of conflicting emotions surged within him. The stray puppy that had so touched his heart was not merely a homeless animal, but it might actually be the long-lost companion of Emma, a living reminder of a tragedy that had once devastated the community. The realization struck him hard. Every night, when the puppy slept alone under that oak tree, he might have been waiting, in his own silent way, for the return of a family that had been torn apart by loss. Unable to contain his mounting emotions, Rivera reached out to a local detective who had once worked on the cold case. Together, they revisited archived evidence and witness testimonies, and it soon became apparent that the puppy had not been adopted or relocated after Emma's disappearance. Instead, rumors had swirled that the animal, possibly frightened by the events of that fateful day, had wandered off into the park and over the years remained as a silent guardian of Emma's memory. The twist did not end there. As Rivera dug deeper, he found a faded photograph tucked away in a box of old case files at the precinct, a photograph of a smiling Emma cradling a little puppy that bore an uncanny resemblance to the stray now sleeping under the oak. The image was almost ghostly in its clarity, as if time itself had preserved a moment of innocence that had been lost to tragedy. The photograph served as undeniable proof linking the stray puppy to Emma's lost past. The discovery left Officer Rivera reeling. His nightly patrols, his tearful moment beneath the lamplight, and his determined quest for answers all converged in this single, heartbreaking revelation. The puppy wasn't just a stray. He was a living echo of a broken promise, a symbol of a love that had been lost and perhaps a call for healing that the community had long yearned for. The realization that this little creature might be the only remaining link to Emma and her family transformed Rivera's investigation from a routine act of kindness into a personal crusade for truth and closure. Determined now more than ever to restore what had been lost, Rivera resolved to do everything in his power to reunite the memory of Emma with her missing piece. He began contacting local historians, reaching out to families who might remember the details of Emma's life, and even setting up a small memorial in the park to honor her memory. His mission, once sparked by a quiet, emotional reaction, had evolved into an endeavor to bring healing to a community long burdened by unresolved grief. In that pivotal moment, as the collar lay in his hand and the faded tag glimmered with the promise of forgotten truths, Officer Rivera realized that sometimes the smallest clues can unlock the deepest mysteries. And for the stray puppy, every night spent beneath the oak tree was not just an act of solitude. It was a silent vigil for a lost little girl whose memory now lived on in every gentle paw print and every tearful glance shared by a cop who refused to let the past fade away. In the wake of the startling discovery linking the stray puppy to Emma's long-forgotten tragedy, the atmosphere around Maplewood Dog Park and throughout the community shifted dramatically. The revelation sent ripples through every layer of society, from the hardened law enforcement officers to the everyday park-goers, and forced everyone to confront emotions long buried beneath routines and bureaucracy. Officer Daniel Rivera, still reeling from the discovery of the engraved collar and the painful memories of a missing little girl, found himself grappling with a profound personal responsibility. In the precinct, while his colleagues discussed routine cases, Rivera's mind was consumed with thoughts of Emma and the puppy's silent vigil. In hushed conversations with his partner, he confessed, "I never imagined a stray could carry so much sorrow. Every night, that little pup is not just sleeping. He's waiting, as if trying to bring back a memory of a love lost long ago." His vulnerability surprised some. His fellow officers, initially taken aback by his emotional openness, gradually began to appreciate the depth of his empathy. Even Sergeant Lopez, who had once cautioned Rivera against letting sentiment cloud his judgment, offered a quiet nod of understanding. "Maybe this case isn't just about enforcing the law," he murmured later, but about giving a community the closure it desperately needs. Outside the precinct, the community's reaction was equally potent. At Maplewood Dog Park, long-time regulars exchanged murmurs as they watched the stray puppy's nightly ritual transform into something laden with meaning. Mrs. Jenkins, the gentle, elderly woman who had fed the park's ducks for years, was seen speaking softly with other park visitors. "I remember when Emma used to come here with her little pup," she recalled, her voice trembling with both nostalgia and sorrow. "To think that this poor puppy might be her lost companion. It breaks my heart, but also reminds me of the resilience of love." Her words, carried on the crisp evening air, encouraged others to open up about their own experiences of loss and hope. Meanwhile, local animal shelter volunteer Carla Martinez found herself inundated with calls and messages from people touched by the story. "We've had several volunteers mention that this story feels personal," she explained, during a meeting with fellow shelter staff. "The idea that a stray might be connected to a beloved child who was lost, it's almost as if the pup has become a symbol of all the pain and beauty of our shared past." Carla organized a small community gathering at the shelter, inviting residents to share memories of Emma and discuss how the tragedy had affected them. The meeting, filled with tearful recollections and quiet declarations of hope, underscored a collective desire to heal old wounds. Back at the police station, the revelation sparked further introspection among officers. Rivera found himself staying late, reviewing old newspaper clippings and archival material about Emma's disappearance. In a candid conversation with a trusted mentor, Detective Morales, he admitted, "This case is no longer just a stray puppy's mystery. It's about a little girl who was once loved and then lost. I feel compelled to give her story the respect it deserves." Detective Morales, a veteran of many cold cases, recognized that this was more than a procedural matter. It was a call for compassion, one that transcended standard police work. As the story began to leak into local media, community leaders took action. Ms. Charlotte Green, already a tireless advocate for transparency and reform, organized a memorial service at Maplewood Dog Park. The event, held on a crisp Saturday morning, gathered former residents, grieving family members, and people who had once known Emma. In a quiet, emotional ceremony beneath the oak tree where the puppy slept, a small plaque was unveiled. "In loving memory of Emma, may every lost soul find a way home." The service not only provided a measure of closure for those who had long carried the burden of unresolved grief, but it also reinforced the notion that even the smallest being, a stray puppy, could serve as a beacon of hope for healing a fractured community. Within Riverdale's local government circles, the emerging story sparked debates about accountability and transparency in public institutions. Councilwoman Rivera, no relation to Officer Daniel Rivera, spoke passionately at a city council meeting about the need to honor the past while forging a new path forward. "We cannot allow our history to be rewritten by silence and neglect," she stated firmly. "This case, as heartbreaking as it is, gives us an opportunity to rebuild trust and to ensure that every voice, no matter how small, is heard." As days turned into weeks, the initial shock gave way to a determined resolve across all sectors. The police department, the shelter, community leaders, and even local government began coordinating efforts to piece together Emma's story. Rivera's investigation grew into a larger community project, one that involved canvassing old neighborhoods, gathering oral histories, and reviewing archival photographs, all in the hope of bringing closure to a lingering mystery. In these moments of collective adjustment, personal vulnerabilities were shared and respected. Conversations that had once been stifled by professional decorum now flowed freely, weaving together the threads of personal loss, communal memory, and the shared determination to see justice and compassion prevail. Each tear shed, whether by a cop in a quiet hallway or by an elderly resident during the memorial service, reinforced the growing understanding that sometimes the most profound healing comes from embracing our shared humanity. With every conversation, every tender recollection, and every step toward uncovering the truth, the community and its protectors found themselves united by a common cause: to ensure that Emma's legacy and the silent vigil of the stray puppy would never be forgotten. In the wake of profound loss, A new hope was being born, one that promised that even in the darkest corners, compassion would shine through. As the community began to process the emotional revelation of Emma's lost legacy and the puppy's haunting connection to her disappearance, new challenges and unexpected subplots started to emerge, deepening the mystery and testing the resolve of those involved. Officer Rivera's investigation, once solely focused on uncovering the origins of the stray, soon intersected with long-forgotten community secrets. One evening, as he revisited the scene beneath the oak tree with renewed determination, a local historian named Mr. Anthony Reed approached him. Mr. Reed, a quiet man with a deep knowledge of Maplewood's past, mentioned that he had come across old town records hinting at a family tragedy that had affected not only Emma's family, but several local households. "There's a pattern here, Mr. Reed confided in a low voice. "Several cases of lost children and vanished pets over the past decades share eerily similar details. It makes one wonder if there's a hidden thread connecting these tragedies." This suggestion introduced a broader subplot, one that implied that Emma's case might not be isolated, but rather part of a series of mysterious events affecting the community. Determined to explore this possibility, Rivera began combing through public records and interviewing older residents, while Mr. Reed offered to share historical documents that might shed light on the recurring pattern of loss in Maplewood. Simultaneously, whispers within the local animal shelter added another layer of intrigue. Volunteer Carla Martinez received an anonymous tip claiming that the stray puppy had once been part of a litter that belonged to a well-known local breeder who had mysteriously fallen on hard times decades ago. The tip suggested that the breeder's financial ruin and subsequent disappearance might have forced the separation of a litter, leaving behind orphaned pups. This revelation prompted Carla to initiate a discreet inquiry into the breeder's history, reaching out to former family members and local veterinarians who remembered the scandal. As Carla pieced together the fragments, she uncovered hints that the breeder had been involved in questionable practices, perhaps even attempting to hide or manipulate records when the tragedy struck. Amid these developments, the media, led by the relentless Olivia Reed, began to intensify their coverage. Olivia received a series of anonymous emails containing snippets of financial records and internal memos from Riverdale Medical Center that hinted at mismanagement and cover-ups. One email, in particular, mentioned that funds allocated for community outreach and compassionate care had mysteriously disappeared over the years, suggesting that powerful figures within the institution might have deliberately stifled innovative programs like Project Compassion. Olivia's articles started to draw a larger audience, putting additional pressure on the hospital administration and fueling debates on transparency and ethics in local governance. As the investigation into the puppy's origins and the linked historical tragedies deepened, tensions also began to rise within the police department. Some officers, witnessing Rivera's emotional vulnerability and dedication, grew increasingly supportive of his quest. However, others, bound by a traditional mindset, questioned whether his personal involvement was clouding his judgment. During a late-night briefing, a veteran officer remarked, "We're not in the business of sentimental investigations. We have a job to do." This internal division forced Rivera to navigate not only the external challenges, but also the skepticism within his own ranks. At Maplewood Dog Park, a subplot of personal redemption began to unfold. Mrs. Jenkins, the longtime park regular known for feeding the ducks, emerged as an unlikely key figure. She revealed that she had once been closely connected to Emma's family, having cared for Emma's pet and even sharing fond memories of the little girl. Her recollections, filled with both joy and lingering sorrow, provided a human face to the cold archival records Rivera was uncovering. Mrs. Jenkins offered to help by organizing a small neighborhood meeting where elderly residents could share their memories and perhaps help piece together what had happened to Emma and her puppy. This grassroots effort soon gained momentum, connecting community members who had long held quiet, personal grief over their lost histories. The convergence of these subplots, historical patterns of loss, the mysterious breeder's scandal, the financial irregularities at the hospital, internal police debates, and the community's own recollections, created an intricate web of challenges. Each new lead carried with it the potential to either illuminate long-hidden truths or plunge the investigation into deeper uncertainty. For Officer Rivera, the journey was no longer a solitary quest to help a forlorn stray. It had grown into a multifaceted mission to heal a community burdened by decades of unanswered questions. In these turbulent days, Rivera found solace in the steadfast support of a few trusted allies, a local historian, a compassionate shelter volunteer, and the gentle encouragement of Mrs. Jenkins. Together, they formed a small network dedicated to preserving the truth and ensuring that every piece of evidence, however obscure, would contribute to a larger narrative of healing and accountability. As dusk fell over Maplewood once more, the stray puppy returned to his nightly vigil under the oak tree, oblivious to the storm of investigations and debates swirling around him. Yet in his silent watch, he had become the catalyst for change, a symbol of the enduring power of memory and compassion amid the relentless march of time. In the weeks that followed the shocking discovery of the puppy's link to a long-forgotten tragedy, the investigation and ensuing community response unearthed not only new leads, but also deep emotional conflicts among all those involved. The strain of reconciling painful memories with a desperate need for closure created a tapestry of personal dilemmas that touched everyone, from Officer Rivera to the park regulars and community advocates. Officer Daniel Rivera, whose initial tearful breakdown had already signaled a departure from the stoic image expected of him, now found himself increasingly torn between his professional duty and the emotional weight of the case. Late one evening, after reviewing witness statements and archival photos of Emma and her lost puppy, Rivera sat alone in his patrol car, notebook in hand. His internal monologue revealed the depths of his inner turmoil. Every time I see that little pup sleeping under the oak tree, I feel as if I'm witnessing a silent plea from a past that still haunts us all. But how can I, sworn to enforce the law, let my emotions overtake my judgment? This inner conflict made him question if he was risking his career by allowing his heart to guide his investigation. At the precinct, Rivera's colleagues offered mixed reactions. Some younger officers, moved by his vulnerability, expressed admiration and even shared personal stories of loss that resonated with the case. One officer recalled how a stray dog had once comforted him during a personal crisis, while another confided that he too had seen the profound impact of compassion on healing. Yet senior officers, hardened by years of maintaining order, viewed his emotional involvement with skepticism. Sergeant Lopez, once a mentor, privately warned him, "We're here to uphold the law, not to get lost in sentiment. I worry that this case might blur those lines for you." Such conflicting advice left Rivera caught in a tug-of-war between professional duty and a newfound commitment to justice rooted in empathy. Meanwhile, at Maplewood Dog Park, longtime visitors began to share their personal recollections of the past, revealing how the park was once a place of bittersweet memories for many in the community. Mrs. Jenkins, known for her gentle nature and daily routine of feeding the ducks, opened up during a small gathering. "I remember when Emma used to come here with her little pup," she said softly to a group of neighbors. "I always thought of that duo as a beacon of innocence. Now, knowing that this stray might be that very pup, it fills me with both sorrow and a strange, hopeful comfort." Her words evoked strong emotions in those present as they recalled their own stories of loss and the healing power of shared memories. Local animal shelter volunteer Carla Martinez also faced her own emotional dilemmas. Dedicated to the welfare of every stray that came through the shelter's doors, Carla had grown attached to the story of the mysterious puppy. But when anonymous tips hinted that the pup might have been abandoned under tragic circumstances connected to Emma's disappearance, she found herself questioning the limits of her role. "How do I balance my duty to care for these animals with the urge to uncover painful truths about their pasts?" she wondered aloud during a late meeting with fellow volunteers. Carla's uncertainty mirrored that of many who worked on the periphery of the investigation, torn between providing immediate care and delving into a history that might reopen old wounds. In a particularly charged moment, the community organized a small memorial service at the park, where residents, former neighbors, and even local officials gathered beneath the oak tree. Emotions ran high as people spoke of Emma's legacy and the enduring impact of the lost bond between a child and her pet. During the service, a young man stood up and tearfully recounted how his own experience with loss had shaped his life, and how the image of the puppy's silent vigil reminded him that even in the deepest sorrow, there is a glimmer of hope. "We are all connected by our shared grief and our capacity to heal," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. His words sparked a cascade of heartfelt confessions, drawing together a diverse group of individuals whose lives had been touched by similar losses. Amid these complex interpersonal interactions, the media continued to amplify the emotional landscape. Olivia Reed's follow-up interviews with affected community members revealed a chorus of voices struggling to reconcile their personal grief with the public need for accountability. In one particularly poignant interview, an elderly woman described how the sight of the stray puppy each night evoked memories of a long-lost family member, leaving her both comforted and pained by the reminder of what had been lost. As the investigation pressed on, each new revelation forced every participant to confront their own vulnerabilities. Rivera, Carla, Mrs. Jenkins, and even skeptical officers were forced to reassess what it meant to serve their community when the case was so deeply interwoven with personal histories and collective memory. The emotional dilemmas that emerged, balancing duty with compassion, professionalism with empathy, and the need for truth with the risk of reopening old wounds, became as central to the story as the mystery of the puppy's origins itself. In these turbulent moments, every tear shed, every whispered conversation, and every silent nod of understanding underscored the realization that sometimes the greatest strength lies in embracing one's emotions. The community, bound by shared pain and a collective desire for healing, slowly began to see that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a powerful catalyst for change. As the investigation into the stray puppy's mysterious origins deepened, an unsettling undercurrent began to ripple through Maplewood Dog Park and the surrounding community. What had once been a quiet vigil of sorrow and hope was now giving way to a series of inexplicable events and cryptic clues that hinted at a larger, darker secret hidden beneath the surface. One overcast evening, as Officer Rivera revisited the oak tree with his notebook and camera in hand, he noticed an unusual disturbance in the grass. In a small, secluded corner near where the puppy slept, he found several scraps of paper, partly hidden beneath fallen leaves and twigs. Curiously, these fragments were covered in hastily scribbled notes and an address, along with a date that seemed to coincide with a long-forgotten local tragedy. Rivera's pulse quickened. He couldn't help but wonder if these papers were connected to the case of Emma and her lost companion, or if they hinted at something even more sinister. That same night, while Rivera was piecing together the torn fabric from his previous discovery, he received an anonymous text message on his work phone. The message simply read, "Not all secrets stay buried. Look closer where the shadows gather." The cryptic nature of the message added a chilling layer to the mystery. Who was behind it, and what exactly were they warning him about? The text stirred an uneasy mix of determination and apprehension in Rivera. He knew he must pursue this new lead, even if it meant venturing into areas of the community that had long been shrouded in silence. In the days that followed, hints of covert activity began to surface around the dog park. Several park-goers reported seeing a figure in a dark jacket lingering near the oak tree after the park had closed. Witnesses described the person as moving with deliberate caution, almost as if they were trying to avoid notice. One jogger, upon slowing down to catch his breath, recalled, "I thought I saw someone crouching near the tree." It was hard to tell, but it looked like they were watching the area intently. These observations, though fragmented and unconfirmed, quickly made their way into local online forums and social media groups, where theories about hidden agendas and secret investigations began to swirl. At the local animal shelter, volunteer Carla Martinez received another anonymous tip. This time, the message came via email and contained a scanned image of a faded photograph, a picture of a small puppy that bore an uncanny resemblance to the stray, but taken years ago during a community event. The email, signed only with the initials V, Climactic mentioned that the puppy in the photo was once part of a litter from a now-defunct breeder, whose family had ties to an unsolved case of child disappearance in the area. Carla's hands trembled as she shared the image with her colleagues. The picture not only evoked memories of lost innocence, but also hinted at a possible connection between the stray's lineage and a darker chapter in Maplewood's history. Meanwhile, Officer Rivera's internal investigation began to attract attention within his own department. During a routine briefing, a junior officer quietly remarked, "I heard rumors that some officers have been reviewing old case files about that missing girl, Emma, and her dog. Do you think it's possible that the puppy is more than just a stray?" The suggestion sent subtle ripples of concern through the team. Some senior officers cautioned that delving into old and unsolved cases might stir up controversies best left alone, while others sympathized with Rivera's determination to follow every lead, no matter how unsettling. As if the situation weren't complex enough, Olivia Reed, the local investigative journalist who had been covering the story from its inception, announced on her popular blog that she had received a tip about a secret meeting scheduled to take place near Maplewood Dog Park. The tip claimed that a group of local activists, and even a few disillusioned former law enforcement officers, were planning to gather in a dimly lit community center later that week to discuss the truth behind the shadows. Olivia's blog post, written in a tone both urgent and quickly went viral among residents who were hungry for answers. The media frenzy intensified the public's curiosity, putting further pressure on the authorities to resolve the enigma. With every new hint, the torn scraps of paper, the anonymous text, the mysterious figure at the park, the faded photograph, and even the leaked tip about a secret meeting, the stakes grew higher. Officer Rivera found himself drawn deeper into a labyrinth of clues that seemed to intertwine the personal tragedy of Emma with broader, more disturbing elements of local history. The park, once a tranquil haven, was transforming into a stage for a hidden drama where every shadow might conceal a secret and every whisper could lead to a revelation. Rivera knew that he had to tread carefully. The anonymous warning suggested that powerful individuals might be invested in keeping these secrets hidden. Yet, as he reviewed his notebook and re-examined the evidence, he felt a compelling drive to uncover the truth. Each step he took not only brought him closer to solving the mystery of the stray's origins, but also risked exposing long-buried wounds that had the power to tear the community apart. In this turbulent atmosphere, where emotions ran high and trust was fragile, the stray puppy continued his nightly vigil beneath the oak tree. Oblivious to the growing storm around him, he slept soundly, a silent sentinel to memories of a lost past and perhaps a beacon for a future where truth would finally be set free. As the anonymous tips and unsettling clues continued to circulate, the story of the stray puppy and its eerie connection to the lost case of Emma began weaving together the lives of many individuals in unexpected ways. The investigation was no longer just Officer Rivera's alone. It had grown into a collective effort, binding together community members, former residents, and even skeptical insiders who now found common ground in their desire for truth and healing. At the heart of this evolving narrative was Mrs. Jenkins, the kindly elderly woman who had long frequented Maplewood Dog Park. Over cups of tea at the park's small pavilion, she shared her recollections of Emma with other regulars. "I remember how Emma used to laugh as she played with her little dog right here," she said softly, her voice thick with nostalgia. Mrs. Jenkins's heartfelt stories resonated deeply with a group of local activists who had been gathering to discuss the unsolved mysteries of Maplewood's past. Their meetings, held in a modest community center, became an informal forum where personal recollections and archival research met. They began connecting fragments of memory with the current clues, linking the torn fabric found by Rivera to an old sweater worn by a child in a faded family photograph, and even matching the mysterious address on the scraps of paper with a long-abandoned neighborhood that once thrived with life. Simultaneously, within the local animal shelter, volunteer Carla Martinez took the initiative to delve further into the puppy's background. Intrigued by the anonymous tip that connected the stray to a defunct breeder's scandal, Carla reached out to former employees of the breeder's facility. In hushed conversations over phone calls and informal visits, she uncovered rumors that the breeder had once lost custody of several litters due to financial and legal troubles. One former caretaker confided, "There were whispers that when the family fell apart, the puppies were scattered, and one of them was never reclaimed." Carla's investigation added a new layer to the unfolding mystery, suggesting that the stray might not only be connected to Emma, but could also be part of a broader pattern of loss stemming from that troubled era. Officer Rivera, meanwhile, continued to document his nightly observations meticulously. His notebook, now brimming with details of weather conditions, park visitor comments, and the stray's behavior, had evolved into a mosaic of small clues that began to paint a larger picture. During a quiet afternoon at the precinct, he reviewed his entries with his partner, Officer Simmons, who admitted, "I used to think cases like these were just about one lonely animal, but now I see they touch on something much deeper, memories of families lost, communities fractured by tragedy." Their conversation sparked an unexpected bond between the two officers, bridging the gap between professional detachment and personal empathy. Rivera's determination to uncover the truth became a rallying point within his unit, slowly shifting perspectives, even among those initially skeptical of his emotional investment. Elsewhere, the local media, led by the intrepid journalist Olivia Reed, played a critical role in connecting the dots. Olivia organized a roundtable discussion at a community hall, inviting former law enforcement officers, local historians, and even members of the affected families. During this event, heated yet constructive debates unfolded. One retired detective recalled how cases of missing children and vanished pets were often intertwined in unsolved local mysteries. "It's as if every stray that appears here carries a story of a family that never got closure," he said. Olivia's ability to weave these personal anecdotes with hard evidence not only drew a larger audience, but also inspired many community members to step forward with their own memories and documents. Her blog posts began featuring scanned images of old newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and even handwritten notes from residents recalling the tragic disappearance of Emma. These contributions enriched the narrative, making the investigation a true community endeavor. During a subsequent neighborhood meeting, organized by Miss Charlotte Green, the activist leader who had already emerged as a key connector, several new voices joined the chorus. A young mother, tearfully sharing her experience of growing up with fragmented family stories, remarked, "We all have pieces of the past that we wish we could understand better." This investigation isn't just about one case, it's about reclaiming our collective memory. Her words struck a chord, leading to the establishment of a dedicated online forum where community members could anonymously share their recollections, photographs, and even old home videos. This digital archive quickly became a treasure trove of personal history, further interlinking the lives affected by the events of that long-ago tragedy. In these interactions, the boundaries between personal grief and public accountability began to blur. The stray puppy's nightly vigil under the oak tree, once a solitary act of survival, was now emblematic of the community's longing for reconciliation with its past. Every shared memory, every tear shed at a public meeting, and every piece of evidence contributed to a growing network of individuals united by their determination to seek the truth. By the time dusk settled once again over Maplewood Dog Park, it was clear that what had started as an investigation into a lonely stray had evolved into a movement, one that connected former neighbors, law enforcement, historians, and activists in a quest to piece together the fragments of a forgotten legacy. The intricate web of subplots and personal connections not only strengthened the investigation, but also promised to bring about healing in a community that had long been haunted by loss. As autumn's chill deepened, the disparate threads of the investigation and community memory began to converge into a boiling cauldron of conflict. The long-suppressed tragedy of Emma, the stray puppy's nightly vigil, and the emerging clues now forced a collision between those determined to preserve painful secrets and those desperate for healing through truth. Late one overcast evening, Officer Daniel Rivera convened an impromptu meeting with a small group of like-minded colleagues at the station. With his notebook spread out and his voice low yet resolute, Rivera laid out the latest developments: torn scraps of paper with a mysterious address, a faded photograph linking the puppy to Emma's past, and testimonies from longtime park regulars. Every clue, Rivera insisted, suggests that this isn't just about a stray wandering alone. It's about a family shattered by loss and a community that's been left with unanswered questions. His passionate plea to his fellow officers stirred both empathy and unease. While some were moved by his conviction, others worried that diving into old unresolved cases might blur the lines between duty and sentimentality. Within the police department, internal conflicts began to surface. Senior officers cautioned that such emotional investigations might distract from their core responsibilities. In a tense discussion in the break room, Sergeant Lopez argued, "We have our hands full with current cases. Delving into old tragedies, no matter how heartbreaking, could jeopardize our focus." Yet younger officers and even a few seasoned colleagues found themselves reluctantly agreeing with Rivera's belief that justice for Emma and closure for the community was paramount. This ideological split threatened to undermine the department's unity, with whispered debates echoing in quiet hallways. Outside the precinct, the community's reaction grew increasingly polarized. At a town hall meeting organized by activist Miss Charlotte Green, a passionate crowd filled the local community center. Emotions ran high as residents recounted their personal memories of Emma and the unhealed wounds that lingered from past losses. "We've been silenced for too long," a local mother declared, her voice shaking with both grief and determination. "If the truth about Emma and that little dog comes out, we might finally begin to heal." However, a faction of more conservative residents argued that stirring up old sorrows could reopen wounds that had, over time, allowed them to move forward. Heated debates broke out, with some accusing the investigative efforts of being a publicity stunt, while others demanded transparency regardless of the potential pain it might cause. Meanwhile, in the shadow of Maplewood Dog Park, the once peaceful area transformed into an arena of whispered secrets and furtive glances. Several park visitors reported seeing a mysterious figure in a dark jacket lingering near the oak tree after closing time, a presence that only deepened the community's unease. Local online forums buzzed with speculation. Was this figure connected to those trying to suppress the truth? Or was it yet another lost soul caught in the currents of a long-forgotten tragedy? At the local animal shelter, volunteer Carla Martinez found herself caught in yet another conflict. While she had grown increasingly supportive of uncovering the puppy's origins, some fellow volunteers worried that exposing too much of the painful past might overwhelm the very animals they sought to help. "We care for these creatures, yes," one volunteer argued, "but we must be cautious not to let human sorrow overshadow the simple act of saving lives." Carla, however, countered that understanding the full story was essential to providing proper care and perhaps even reuniting lost families. As these various conflicts reached a crescendo, the pressure began to mount on all fronts. Officer Rivera, now more emotionally invested than ever, received an urgent call from a local historian who had uncovered an archival record linking the mysterious address on the torn papers to a dilapidated neighborhood once known for its tight-knit families. The historian's voice trembled with excitement and sorrow as he said, "This address might hold the key to Emma's story. It could explain why that little pup still returns here every night, as if it's waiting for a family that's long been lost." Rivera's heart pounded with the realization that the mystery was no longer confined to the park. It was about to engulf an entire community. In the midst of this mounting tension, media pressure continued to intensify. Olivia Reed's recent blog posts had sparked widespread debate, and her latest exposé promised to delve even deeper into the connections between the stray puppy, Emma's disappearance, and the ongoing internal struggles within the police department and the community. Her articles, accompanied by haunting images of the puppy sleeping under the oak tree, amplified public outcry. Residents began organizing protests, demanding that local authorities honor the memory of Emma and take meaningful action to heal old wounds. With every new lead, every heated discussion, and every emotive plea, the stakes grew higher. The community was on the verge of a reckoning. Would they let old secrets continue to fester, or would they finally confront the truths of their shared past? Officer Rivera, driven by both professional duty and deep personal empathy, now stood at the crossroads of this monumental conflict. The pressure to act was immense, and he knew that one wrong move could shatter the fragile hope that had been building over the weeks. As dusk fell once again over Maplewood Dog Park, the stray puppy, oblivious to the storm of conflict swirling around him, settled quietly beneath the oak tree. Yet, his presence had become a potent symbol, a silent call for justice, for remembrance, and for a community to reclaim its lost narrative. With the convergence of internal dissent, community outcry, and mounting media scrutiny, everything was poised for a climactic turning point that would forever alter the course of this haunting mystery. As the pressures from the community, media, and internal discord converged, the time for decisive action drew near. The tension had reached a fever pitch in every corner of Maplewood, and all eyes were now on those responsible for shaping its future. In a specially convened meeting at the local community center, key figures gathered: Officer Daniel Rivera, a few supportive members of his department, community activist Ms. Charlotte Green, local historians, and even representatives from the animal shelter. Their goal was clear: to confront the deep-seated issues plaguing Maplewood Dog Park and to decide once and for all how to honor Emma's memory and bring closure to the haunting mystery of the stray puppy. The room was packed with an eclectic mix of individuals whose voices were unified by a shared longing for truth and healing. Miss Green opened the session with an impassioned address. "We are not here to rehash old sorrows," she declared, her eyes scanning the crowd, "but to demand accountability and to ensure that our community's lost memories are finally given a voice." Her words resonated with many, stirring both determination and trepidation. The air crackled with anticipation as she unveiled a proposal: a comprehensive public inquiry into the circumstances surrounding Emma's disappearance, the stray puppy's unending vigil, and any possible connection between them. Officer Rivera took the floor next, his voice steady yet filled with raw emotion. "For months, I have patrolled these grounds and witnessed a little life enduring silent grief, night after night," he began. "I now believe that this pup is not merely a stray, but a living symbol of a family's loss, and perhaps of a community's unhealed wounds. We cannot let bureaucracy, secrecy, or fear keep us from addressing these truths." His passionate words sparked murmurs of agreement among the attendees, though a few skeptical voices murmured concerns about reopening painful cases. The confrontation escalated when a representative from the local police command, an officer with decades of experience, challenged Rivera's approach. "We are duty-bound to uphold the law, not to be swayed by sentiment," the officer asserted, his tone measured but firm. "While your heart is in the right place, we must consider the potential ramifications of dredging up old tragedies on active cases and our current operations." Rivera's eyes blazed with determination as he replied, "I am not asking for sentimentality at the expense of justice. I am asking that we acknowledge the past so that we may learn from it and ensure that every lost voice, every forgotten child, and every abandoned animal is given the dignity it deserves." The debate grew heated as community members rose to speak. A local mother, visibly moved by the story of Emma and the stray puppy, pleaded, "I lost my brother to a tragedy that was swept under the rug. If we allow these stories to remain hidden, we are not healing. We are simply burying our grief even deeper." Her impassioned plea, filled with personal anguish and hope for change, prompted others to share similar sentiments. The discussion soon turned from abstract policy to the very real personal impact of neglect and silence on the community's collective well-being. In the midst of this passionate exchange, Ms. Charlotte Green proposed a bold decision. "Let us form a joint task force," she declared, "composed of community leaders, law enforcement representatives, and local historians. This task force will oversee a full-scale, independent investigation into Emma's disappearance, the origins of this puppy's nightly vigil, and any related irregularities within our public institutions." The proposal was met with a mix of cautious optimism and anxious deliberation. Some board members from the community center's organizing committee expressed concerns about legal repercussions or reopening closed cases, while others saw it as a necessary step toward restoring trust. After a tense round of discussions, a vote was taken. The majority of the assembled group, spanning police officers, community activists, and even a few empathetic voices from within the local government, voted in favor of establishing the task force. The decision marked a turning point. It was an unequivocal statement that the community would no longer allow old secrets to dictate their future. Officer Rivera, buoyed by the task force's formation, vowed to dedicate every resource available to uncover the truth. "This isn't just about one puppy or one missing girl," he declared. "It's about reclaiming our history and ensuring that every small life, every whisper of loss, is acknowledged and remembered." His words were met with a thunderous round of applause from the crowd, sealing the task force's mandate with hope and determination. As the meeting drew to a close, the attendees dispersed into the cool night air, their faces reflecting both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of newfound resolve. Rivera stepped out of the community center, the stray puppy, now affectionately dubbed Hope, nestled against his side. The chill of the night seemed less biting now, replaced by the warmth of solidarity and the promise of change. In that defining moment, every whispered word and every impassioned plea had paved the way for a public reckoning, a final confrontation that would, at last, set the stage for healing in a community long haunted by unresolved sorrow. As the sun dipped below the horizon on an especially chilly evening, the entire community of Maplewood, and particularly those gathered around Maplewood Dog Park, seemed to hold its breath. The tension that had been building over weeks of investigations, heated debates, and stirring personal memories had reached a fever pitch. Every whispered conversation, every furtive glance exchanged among parkgoers, and every tear shed in quiet solidarity spoke of the impending moment when the truth would no longer be kept in the shadows. Officer Daniel Rivera, having led the charge in forming a joint task force with community leaders, law enforcement colleagues, and local historians, now stood on the precipice of a defining moment. In the dim light of the park's old oak tree, beneath which the stray puppy, affectionately known as Hope, slept nightly, Rivera reviewed his collection of notes and photographs. Each page of his worn notebook held clues, torn scraps of paper with mysterious addresses, faded images linking the puppy to the tragic disappearance of a little girl named Emma, and observations made by residents who remembered a family once united by love but torn apart by loss. Across town, at the community center where the newly established task force had gathered, the atmosphere was charged with urgency. Local activists, representatives from the police department, and even skeptical voices from within local government filled the room. The meeting had been extended late into the evening, with a palpable mix of anxiety and determination permeating every word. Miss Charlotte Green, whose impassioned pleas had helped rally support for the investigation, paced the stage as she addressed the assembly. "Tonight," she declared, "we stand at the brink of a revelation. Every piece of evidence we've uncovered points to a past that has haunted this community for too long. We are ready to confront our history head-on, regardless of the pain it may bring." The task force's members exchanged resolute nods as the discussion turned to the next crucial step, coordinating with local media and preparing to reveal their findings to the public. However, just as it seemed they were on the verge of a breakthrough, a startling development rattled the room. One of the senior detectives, reviewing the latest security footage from Maplewood Dog Park, discovered a series of shadowy images captured after the park had closed. The footage showed a figure in a dark jacket, moving deliberately near the oak tree, seemingly observing the sleeping puppy. The detective's voice quivered as he reported, "There's someone here. Someone who shouldn't be." This figure appears to be monitoring the area, and they're clearly intent on ensuring that certain secrets remain hidden. A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. The possibility that powerful individuals were actively trying to obstruct the investigation injected a new layer of urgency and fear. Officer Rivera felt his heart pounding. The realization that the mystery was deeper and more dangerous than anyone had suspected set his determination ablaze. "We must be prepared," he said, his voice low and resolute, "to protect our evidence and ensure that no one silences the truth." Outside the community center, the night air was crisp, and the silence of the park was almost eerie. Under the flickering glow of a lone street lamp near the oak tree, the stray puppy, Hope, remained undisturbed in his nightly vigil. Yet, every rustle of leaves and every shifting shadow seemed to hint at the presence of unseen watchers. Local residents, now alerted to the tension by social media posts and news updates, began to gather discreetly near the park. Their anxious whispers filled the air as they exchanged theories about who might be behind the mysterious figure seen on the security footage. In the midst of this charged atmosphere, Olivia Reed, the relentless journalist whose blog had kept the community informed, released a breaking news update. Her post detailed the latest findings, the formation of the task force, and the ominous discovery of the shadowy figure at the park. "This is not just a story about a stray puppy," she wrote. "It's a story about the lengths to which those in power will go to bury painful truths. And we are determined to bring every detail to light." Her words ignited a firestorm online, with residents sharing the update, demanding accountability, and expressing both fear and hope that justice would prevail. Back at the community center, the task force prepared to mobilize further. Plans were made to safeguard all physical evidence, to arrange for additional surveillance around Maplewood Dog Park, and to schedule a public press conference the following morning. The room buzzed with urgent activity as members coordinated with local authorities and legal advisors. Every passing minute added to the mounting suspense. The stakes were higher than ever. This was a battle not only for the truth about Emma and her lost companion, but also for the integrity and future of the entire community. As midnight approached, and the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, Officer Rivera stood outside, hope by his side, under the ancient oak tree. The park, once a place of peaceful routine, had transformed into a battleground of secrets and revelations. Rivera's gaze swept over the silent expanse, a silent promise echoing in his mind, that no matter the risks, he would see this mystery through to the end. The stage was set, the tension was at its peak, and the community, united by shared grief, hope, and determination, braced itself for the inevitable confrontation with a past that refused to remain hidden. As the first light of dawn crept over Maplewood Dog Park, the tension that had been mounting for weeks finally reached its boiling point. The community, the police department, and every soul touched by the mystery of the stray puppy now braced themselves for the ultimate reckoning, a moment when hidden truths and long-suppressed grief would collide in an explosion of revelation and emotion. Officer Daniel Rivera stood at the foot of the old oak tree, the place where the puppy, affectionately known as Hope, had spent countless nights in silent vigil. In his hand, he clutched the worn leather collar with the engraved tag that had set his investigation in motion. Tonight, as he reviewed every scrap of evidence and every whispered clue gathered from community meetings, Rivera felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. The clues had led him from the torn pieces of paper with cryptic addresses to faded photographs that tied the puppy to a tragic case of a missing child, Emma. Now, he knew the time had come to bring everything into the light. Across town, at the community center where the joint task force had been assembled, a large crowd gathered in anticipation. Local activists, former residents, law enforcement representatives, and even skeptical local officials had come together for one final press conference. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of hope, grief, and defiant determination. Miss Charlotte Green, the community activist who had become the movement's figurehead, stood at the podium with a calm authority. "For too long, our community has suffered in silence," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion. "We have uncovered a story of loss and betrayal, of secrets that have haunted us for decades. Tonight, we demand that every hidden truth be revealed and every memory be honored." At that moment, Olivia Reed's live broadcast on local television cut in. Her voice, filled with both urgency and compassion, announced the most shocking piece of evidence yet: security footage that clearly showed a hooded figure tampering with archived files at the park. Evidence that powerful forces had tried to keep the story buried. As the video played on the large screen behind the podium, gasps rippled through the crowd. The images were irrefutable, tying the clandestine actions directly to those who wished to silence the truth about Emma's disappearance and the lost family that had once loved her. Back at the oak tree, Rivera knelt beside Hope. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he murmured, "You've carried so much sorrow on your tiny shoulders. Tonight, I promise, we will set things right." In that moment, he felt as if every heartbeat, every whispered recollection from the community was converging upon him. With determination that cut through his lingering doubts, he dialed the number from the engraved tag. The phone rang, and after a few tense moments, a voice answered. A voice that belonged to a woman who identified herself as Emma's long-lost aunt. Through shaky words and tearful confessions, she revealed that Emma had been taken from her family in a moment of inexplicable tragedy, and that the puppy had been her constant companion in those final desperate days. The aunt's revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered task force, as it confirmed that the stray was indeed a living memorial to a family broken by loss. As the news spread, emotions exploded. Within the community center, a hush fell over the crowd before it erupted into a mixture of cheers, cries, and solemn prayers. Councilwoman Rivera, no relation to Officer Daniel Rivera, stepped forward to address the crowd. "Today, we bear witness to the truth," she declared, her voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "No longer will the pain of the past be hidden away. We will honor Emma's memory, and through her, the memory of every forgotten soul in our community." At the same time, within the police department, the division between hardline traditionalists and the compassionate reformers came to a head. A senior officer, previously skeptical of Rivera's approach, publicly acknowledged the depth of the investigation and apologized for the department's earlier reluctance. "Today, I stand with Officer Rivera," he proclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. "We have learned that true law enforcement isn't just about upholding the rules, it's about serving the heart of our community. I'm proud to say that we will support this investigation fully." The climax of the moment was reached when Rivera, emboldened by the overwhelming support and the weight of irrefutable evidence, stepped up to the podium alongside Miss Green and Olivia Reed. With hope by his side, he addressed the assembled crowd in a voice that carried both sorrow and fierce determination. "This little pup has shown us that even in the darkest nights, there is hope," he declared. "Emma's story, our community's history, and every lost memory deserve to be remembered. Tonight, we commit ourselves to ensuring that no act of compassion is ever silenced again." As the press conference concluded, the community center erupted in applause and tears, a cathartic release that signaled the beginning of a new chapter for Maplewood. The revelations promised not only justice for Emma and her family, but also a sweeping change in how the community and local institutions would honor the power of empathy in the future. In that defining moment, as the first rays of dawn bathed Maplewood Dog Park in a soft, hopeful light, Officer Rivera looked up at the old oak tree. The stray puppy, still sleeping peacefully, had become a symbol of resilience and a beacon for truth. Rivera's promise to uncover every hidden secret and to ensure that every whisper of loss was met with compassionate action resonated in every heart present. The storm of conflict had reached its apex, and now, with the truth laid bare, the community was ready to rebuild, a future where every act of kindness was celebrated and no tear was ever allowed to fall in vain. As the sun rose over Maplewood Dog Park, a gentle warmth replaced the cool night air, symbolizing the dawn of a new era for the community. The tumultuous journey that had begun with a stray puppy's nightly vigil had now culminated in revelations that bridged decades of silent grief and ignited hope for healing. Officer Daniel Rivera, who had once been overwhelmed by emotion and burdened by unanswered questions, now stood as a beacon of compassion and perseverance. In the days that followed the dramatic press conference, the entire community of Maplewood slowly began to stitch together its fractured past. With the joint task force firmly in place, local authorities, community activists, and even previously skeptical law enforcement officials worked side by side to honor the memory of Emma and to ensure that no act of compassion would ever be punished again. The evidence that had once threatened to tear the community apart had instead become the catalyst for a sweeping transformation. At Maplewood Dog Park, where the stray puppy, affectionately named Hope, had spent every night in silent vigil, a modest memorial was erected beneath the ancient oak tree. A small plaque read, "In loving memory of Emma, may every lost soul find its way home." This simple yet powerful tribute not only honored a little girl whose disappearance had haunted the town for years, but also celebrated the resilience of a community that had finally chosen to face its painful past. Neighbors, former park regulars, and even passers-by would often pause at the memorial, their eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and hope as they remembered the many lives touched by loss and love. Officer Rivera continued his daily patrols with a renewed sense of purpose. Every evening, as he passed by the oak tree and glimpsed Hope sleeping soundly, he was reminded of the promise he had made that fateful night, to never let compassion be stifled by indifference or bureaucracy. The evidence he had uncovered, the tearful confessions and the heartfelt speeches, had all converged into a singular truth, that every lost memory deserved a chance to be remembered and healed. His colleagues, inspired by his example, began to adopt a more empathetic approach to their work. Even Sergeant Lopez, who had once cautioned Rivera against letting emotion cloud his judgment, now openly acknowledged that empathy was the cornerstone of true service. "We're not just enforcers of the law," he remarked in a quiet moment. "We're also protectors of our community's heart." Across town, the community center, now a hub of activity and healing, hosted regular forums where residents, historians, and local officials gathered to share stories of the past and ideas for a more compassionate future. These meetings grew into a grassroots movement that called for increased transparency and reform in all public institutions. Olivia Reed's continuing coverage of the story brought further light to the transformation, her blog posts and interviews echoing the sentiment that no tragedy should be hidden and no act of kindness should be suppressed. In one particularly moving session, a former neighbor of Emma tearfully recounted how the story had helped her come to terms with her own long-ago loss. "For years, I carried my grief in silence," she confessed, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Today, seeing how our community has rallied to honor Emma and every forgotten soul, it gives me hope that we can mend our hearts together." Her words resonated with everyone present, reinforcing the belief that healing was not an individual journey, but a collective one. The sweeping changes did not stop there. The local government, spurred by the public outcry and the undeniable evidence of corruption and suppression, initiated an independent audit of all community institutions. The investigation led to significant reforms, ensuring that policies would now prioritize empathy and transparency over rigid protocols. A new advisory board was established, composed of community leaders, law enforcement representatives, and historians dedicated to preserving the legacy of compassion. Their mission was simple yet profound: to guarantee that every act of kindness, no matter how small, would be celebrated, and that no community member's pain would ever be dismissed. As weeks turned into months, the impact of the events at Maplewood Dog Park rippled far beyond the boundaries of the town. Other communities began to take notice, and similar movements sprang up in neighboring areas, all inspired by Maplewood's courage to confront its past and transform it into a future defined by empathy. For Officer Rivera, every time he looked at Hope sleeping peacefully under the oak tree, he saw not just a stray puppy, but a living symbol of the community's resilience. His heart, once heavy with sorrow, now beat with the assurance that truth and compassion had prevailed. In his final report to the task force, Rivera wrote, "In the quiet vigil of one small creature, we found the strength to face our deepest losses and the hope to build a better tomorrow." Before closing his report, he issued a call to action. "Let this be a reminder to all of us that every act of compassion, no matter how quietly performed, has the power to change lives. I urge every member of our community to continue sharing their stories, to never let a tear fall in vain, and to always remember that healing begins with acknowledging the truth." As Maplewood Dog Park and its community moved forward into the light of a new day, the legacy of Emma, the healing power of hope, and the transformation sparked by a single cop's tearful moment served as a timeless testament. A testament that in every corner of darkness there lies the promise of dawn, and that when we stand together, compassion can indeed change the world.